Good morning. Welcome to this morning's AWS webinar. My name's Ian. I'm a technical evangelist with Amazon Web Services here in Europe. And today we're going to be providing an overview of cloud computing with AWS. The title of this webinar is What is Cloud Computing? Firstly, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. And secondly, I just want to talk about a couple of logistical topics. So the slides from this webinar are going to be available immediately afterwards for download. There are a few links in the slides that you might want to follow, but don't bother making a note because you can download the slides as soon as we finish from the webinar platform. Secondly, if you have any questions, please type these into the live chat during the webinar and a member of our team will get back to you after the session. We can gather your contact details from your questions, so you don't need to provide those. Just type your question and we'll come back to you. Okay, so let's get started. We've got quite a lot of content to cover today. The three topics that we're going to be covering in this morning's webinar. Firstly, we're going to take a look at what is cloud computing with AWS and what are some of the benefits that AWS customers realize from using the services that we provide. Secondly, we're going to be looking at who is using AWS and in detail at a few different examples of what customers are using the services for. So that should give you a flavor for what people are adopting the service for. And then thirdly, we're going to run through a broad selection of AWS services and talk to you about how you can use those to run your workloads. So let's get started and have a look at the definition of cloud computing and what some of the benefits are. So very simply put, cloud computing is renting servers and storage on demand when you need it. Whatever the size of your organization is, you probably depend on applications that you need to run reliably and securely in a cost-efficient manner. And AWS can provide a complete set of compute storage, database, and other application services that can allow you to run those applications. All those services are accessible via the internet. They're available on demand, and you only pay for the resources that you use. So what are some of the benefits that customers can get from using these kind of services? The first thing is customers are able to convert capital expenditure into operational expenditure. This means that there's no upfront charge for using the service, and they're just charged to you on a simple monthly bill on the basis of what you use. So it's a very simple model, and you don't need to invest upfront in any infrastructure, data centers, or software. Secondly, there is a lower total cost from using these services. That's really for two reasons. The first is AWS is a very large-scale business. We run our business on the basis of being a high-volume and low-margin business, which is quite unusual for the IT industry. The combination of very large scale and low margins allows us to be very, very cost-efficient and pass all of those efficiency savings onto our customers. A great proof point here is the fact that we've reduced services prices over 40 times over the course of the lifetime of the AWS services. So we're constantly trying to drive down and make the model as efficient as possible and pass those savings on to customers to lower their TCO. The third benefit that customers tell us they can derive from using AWS is that they don't need to guess capacity. The services that we provide are elastic, so you no longer need to forecast the amount of demand that you're going to have and buy infrastructure, software, or data centers up front. Just consume what you need. You'll be charged for it with a simple monthly bill, and there's lots and lots of capacity there for you to leverage in order to deal with the spikes that might occur within your business, unpredictable demand, or just the fact that you've been very successful. Fourthly, we find that customers tell us that they can increase innovation by using AWS services. The real reason for this is that the cost of experimentation with AWS is extremely low. You can start a service, try something, spin up new servers and databases and other application components that you might need very, very quickly and with no risk, because there's no commitment when you use the services. If that experiment doesn't work, just stop, cease the services, and you won't be charged anymore. If it does work, then you can scale very, very easily and continue to keep a very, very low risk profile in doing that. The fifth benefit that customers tell us they see is that we can take on responsibility for a lot of the low-value activities that are typical within the delivery of IT services. So building data centers, stacking them with equipment, and doing low-level configuration of that equipment is not really very differentiating. If you don't do that, then you can use your resources for things which do genuinely differentiate. development or marketing or other activities that are going to help you be more successful, you're free to do that if you're not dealing with that low-level infrastructure. And then lastly, we have a global platform. So we'll come in a few minutes to talk about the locations, the regions within which AWS operates, but we provide consistent service globally. So I was actually talking to a customer earlier this week about global expansion. They're currently operating in the UK. They want to roll their services out into Asia, into Australia. And with the AWS platform, it's simple to do that with just a few mouse clicks. So it's very, very easy to use the global platform that we have to achieve global expansion. Okay, let's move on now and talk about a few examples of customers that are using AWS and how they're using it. So the first thing to say is that many of the world's most popular internet businesses are built on the AWS platform. You can see some great logos on here and some very well-known high-growth and high-scale organizations. I'm not going to go into any of these in detail, but if you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see a link there which will take you to a long, long list of case studies of customers and different organizations that are using AWS today. And please follow that link after the session and you can find a lot more out about all of the organizations that are shown on this slide. We're also very, very well adopted in the enterprise segment by more traditional organizations. And again, you can find more detail on many of these case studies by following the link at the bottom of this slide. But it's not the case that AWS is used only by high-growth startups. We're also playing a key role in many of the world's most important and well-known brands. That's a high-level overview of some of the customers that we've got and some of the logos that we have. We'll move on now and have a look at a few examples in detail. So the first one is S&P Capital. S&P Capital are a financial information service provider. They provide data research and analytics to institutional investors, investment advisors, and wealth managers across the world. Company offers capabilities designed to help these individuals and organizations track the performance of and identify new trading and investment opportunities. So it's a highly critical financial information service that they provide, a subscription service, obviously, and these customers are paying for that service. What they've built on top of AWS is an analytics capability to help them deal with generating insight from unstructured data. So they use a service which we'll talk about later, Amazon Web Services EMR, Elastic MapReduce, and they connect that to infrastructure that they have in their own locations, loading data from that infrastructure into our EMR cluster, performing high-performance analysis on that data, and then taking those insights and placing them back into their products for delivery to their customers. So a good example of a customer that's operating in this hybrid model using some AWS resources together with some of their own IT infrastructure. So the next example we're going to look at is Lionsgate. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of this organization. They're a diversified global entertainment corporation. They produce feature films and television shows. A couple of the recent hits include Mad Men and the movie Hunger Games, which I'm sure a lot of you will have seen or be aware of. So Lionsgate have a traditional enterprise application set which is running on top of the AWS VPC service. They're using SharePoint and SAP. And they've got some pretty good metrics there that you can see on the slide about the financial benefits of using the service. I think they've saved over $1 million over 3 years by migrating these applications onto the AWS service. And the final example that we're going to look at is Samsung. This is a really good case study. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the Samsung smart TV products, great looking products that have got really widespread adoption now. They're one of the leading TV brands worldwide. If you have one of these products, you're probably familiar with an application that runs on there called the Smart Hub, which allows you to access streaming media services, to install applications onto your TV, which might be social media applications or other information services, or even to browse the web. Well, this Smart Hub application is built on top of the AWS cloud, and it's obviously a very large global application. Samsung are distributing these products worldwide, so they're making use of the global footprint that AWS can offer. And they've got quite amazing savings by using the AWS services. They calculate that they've saved over $34 million in hardware and maintenance expenses in the first 2 years of that service. So very, very compelling financial case for adoption of AWS by Samsung that you can see there. And once again, you can find a lot more detail on those case studies and the other customers that I mentioned earlier in this section of the webinar by going to the URL at the bottom of the page there. So please download these slides afterwards and do that. Let's move on now to AWS Products and how you can use the products to run your workloads. This is the main part of the webinar today, so it's quite a long section. So we organize our products into this architectural construct. We have a global infrastructure platform, which I'm going to talk about first. We then have a foundational layer of networking services, compute, storage, and database services, which are really the core of the offering. But then we've got some really, really high value and really cool application services and services for deployment and admin that sit on top of the platform that can make it really easy for you to develop applications that use the AWS services. So we'll go through these different components of our stack in a little bit more detail. I'll give you an overview of what we have. Before we do that, though, let's just talk about the global infrastructure platform that I just mentioned. I've already talked about the global footprint that we have, but just to show that to you, we've currently got 9 regions around the world. A region, if you're not aware, is a cluster of data centers in one geographic area connected by a high bandwidth, low latency network. And each of those regions is split into availability zones, which are failure domains. So, for example, in the EU West region, which you can see in the middle of the slide there, we have 3 availability zones. And we'll talk later in the webinar about how you can use best practices for architecture across those availability zones to deliver applications that have got really high availability characteristics. There are actually 8 publicly accessible regions today. The 9th region is a GovCloud region, which is located in Oregon in the United States. That region is restricted to the US government and government-sponsored entities that can also use it. But we're continuously expanding the region footprint that we have, and in fact, we just announced, it's not shown on this slide, it's so new, we just announced a new region in Beijing in China, which will open later this year, and that will obviously build out our footprint in Asia. So, also, obviously a key topic for all customers is security, and security is an absolute priority for AWS. You'll often hear people from AWS say that they've never heard of a customer that asks for a service to be less secure, and I mean that's absolutely true. So, constantly striving to improve the security of our services, and also to acquire and maintain relevant accreditations which demonstrate and prove the secure nature of the services that we offer. So we operate, for example, under an ISO 27001 compliant security management process. We have PCI DSS accreditation, which means that we're accredited to handle payment card data. We also hold a number of accreditations that are relevant to governmental organizations around the world, including the US federal government. So it's constantly a focus for Amazon Web Service and something that we spend a lot of time working to improve for customers. Let's talk about purchasing models now. So many of our services have different acquisition models that customers can use to optimize the costs of acquiring the services. And here we're looking at examples of the different purchasing models that are available for our EC2 computing service, the Elastic Compute Cloud. Just quickly touch on these. So moving from left to right, the first important thing to know is that you can get started with AWS at no cost. So there's a limited amount of service that's available under the free tier. It lasts for a year from sign up, and you can access, for example, a Linux and Windows micro instance for 750 hours a month, which is enough to run one of each instance type for a whole month. You can access 5 gigabytes of storage on the S3 service free of charge also. So it allows you to get started with the service at no cost, and it's a good way for people to familiarize themselves with AWS and learn a little bit about the technology without having to spend any money to do that. Then we're moving through into the chargeable purchase model. So the first is on demand. This is a flexible model where you pay by the hour for compute capacity as you use it. It's completely commitment free. Secondly, we have reserved instances. With the reserved instances, you make a low upfront payment, and that entitles you to a significant discount on the hourly charge for that instance. So this is over a 1 or 3 year time frame, and this is the best way to acquire instances that you know you're going to need on a consistent basis. Thirdly, we have the spot market. This really allows you to bid for unused capacity. It's charged at a spot price, which fluctuates based on the supply and demand for the particular instance type that you want to acquire. It's really good for time-insensitive workloads or transient workloads, and a lot of people use this with our Hadoop, our EMR service, to accelerate the output from their EMR jobs at very, very low cost. And then lastly, we have dedicated instances, which are actually dedicated hardware, which will only be used by your organization. It's good for a small number of customers that have highly sensitive or compliance-related workloads and need to make sure that they're the only people that are running on the infrastructure that they are using. Now, a little trick or tip here is that the best way to optimize the costs of running your applications on AWS is to blend these resources together. So have your fixed capacity in the reserved instance types, and then have your variable capacity in on-demand and your non-time critical workloads in spot. And by doing that, you can get extremely good cost-competitive TCO. Okay. Right, now let's move on to dive into a few of the services in a little bit more detail. We're going to start with the compute services, EC2. So we have three core components here. The first is, and we've talked about this quite a lot already, the EC2, the instances, which are elastic virtual servers running on the AWS cloud. We have these available with either Windows or Linux operating systems, and we have a very wide range of different configurations available, from the very small, I mentioned already the micro instance, all the way through to the very large, the cluster compute, memory intensive and IO intensive instance types that we have, which have quite amazing performance characteristics. We just announced quite recently an IO intensive instance type that can support 350,000 IOPS per second, which is an incredible amount of performance. So it's very possible to run high performance computing, high IO or high memory workloads on these instances, and to do that in a way which gives you obviously by the hour charging and very, very cost effective access to these compute resources. It's possible to save the configurations of these instances using something called an AMI, an Amazon Machine Image. And these images can be used to create new instances. So you can snapshot and replicate images very, very easily. You also have full firewall control over your instances using a feature called security groups. So you've got extremely fine-grained control over the security of your compute resources. The next thing we have in the compute area is auto-scaling. This is a mechanism for achieving that elasticity characteristic that I talked about. So you can define minimum and maximum pool sizes here, and you can define policies that will cause your compute resources to scale within the limits of the pool that you've defined. Typically, you're looking here at the amount of memory or CPU that your instances are using, and when a threshold is reached, you're either starting up new instances to add to the pool or stopping instances to take them away. Now, this obviously is integrated with the final service on this slide, this ELB, the Elastic Load Balancer. This is an elastic service that automatically scales to handle request volume. It'll check the health of instances and take them in or out of service on the basis of health. And if you've got an auto-scaling group, it'll obviously allow you to elastically scale the pool of instances that you have. It has a couple of advanced features as well, session stickiness to make sure that sessions will generally be delivered back onto the same instance as long as it's available. And you can also offload SSL termination onto this load balancer to lift some of the compute activity off your instances and run it on this scalable load balancer. So there's three core services there. We're going to come to talk about storage and how you can attach it to instances in a few minutes, but that should give you a flavor for the compute services. There's also one new service that we recently announced, which is called Amazon WorkSpaces. This is new. It's in limited preview at the moment, and we announced it at our global user education event, reInvent, last year in November. This is a mechanism for running desktop workloads in the cloud. So it allows you to provision a cloud-based desktop, and then an end user can access that in order to access documents, applications, and resources that they might need. And they can do that from a device of their choice. So whether they've got a Kindle Fire, an iPad, or an Android tablet, they can access a Windows desktop experience, and it's extremely simple and cost-effective to use. So we're really trying to simplify access to this VDI, this virtual desktop infrastructure, this cloud-based desktop service, and make it a lot more accessible than it has been historically. That's a very new service in the compute portfolio. Let's take a quick look at networking. So there are, again, three core services in the networking area. The first is VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. This allows you to provision your own IP addressing within the AWS cloud. You can also design and deploy your own network topology. So if you have a complex network topology that you need in order to segregate aspects of your application for security reasons, or you want to run some parts of your application that are public facing and some parts that are private. You can achieve that with the VPC. You can also connect the VPC, the virtual data center, to your own data centers. So you can have a secure, isolated connection into parts of your VPC, have other parts of your VPC connected to the internet, and obviously you can integrate those two things with a variety of network services. So it's good for complex configurations and for improving the security of your environment. Secondly, we've got Direct Connect. This allows you to directly connect your data center to AWS privately using either a 1 gigabit or 10 gigabit connection, and you can sub-interface that physical circuit, so you can deliver different chunks of that capacity into different parts of your VPC or into a public connection into AWS. So it's often used by organizations that need to move large amounts of data from their own data center into the AWS cloud in a very, very performance predictable manner and a very secure manner. And then lastly, we have Route 53, which is a highly scalable and flexible DNS service. So it allows for domain name resolution. It's got some really cool features like latency-based routing and DNS failover. And it integrates really tightly with some of the other products that we've got, like the Elastic Load Balancer, for example. So you can use this service to achieve, for example, multi-region delivery of applications where you might be serving different parts of the world from different AWS regions in order to optimize for performance and availability. So that's a pretty cool service. Let's move on now and look at storage. There's 4 services here. The first is EBS. EBS is a mechanism for attaching block storage volumes, block storage devices, to your EC2 compute instances. So it's private to your instances. You can use provisioned IOPS, which is a feature that enables you to get the desired level of I/O performance on an individual volume or set of volumes. And these EBS volumes can also be snapshotted to enable you to do point-in-time restore, intraday or intra-month backups would typically be done with these snapshots. So it's a very, very flexible service, and it forms the basis for storing block-based data that is attached to instances, directly to instances. The second storage service that we have is something called Amazon S3, Simple Storage Service. This is an internet-scale storage service that's accessible via an API. It really is enormous. There are trillions of objects stored in this today, and peak request rates for S3 globally are over 2 million objects per second, so an incredibly scalable distributed system. You can store files or objects here that are up to 5 terabytes in size, and we provide for 11 nines of durability on those objects, so it's an extremely durable service with really good characteristics for ensuring that you can always get your data back. It's also got a few advanced features. You can exercise granular control over objects. You can also use Amazon S3 for hosting a static website, and it has lifecycle management features for automatically removing old objects or, for example, moving them to archive storage in Glacier, another one of our services that I'll talk about in a second. We're actually going to be doing a follow-up webinar next week, which is a masterclass on S3, where we're going to be diving into some of these advanced features. So if you're interested in that, you can find that on the webinar channel that we have, and we'll probably be sending out some mails. You may already have one already, so sign up for that if you're interested in more on S3. There's a lot of features there, more than we can go into in this session. Thirdly, we've got Glacier, which is intended for long-term archive use cases. It also supports 11 nines of durability, but it's extremely cost-effective. Okay, about $1 cent per gigabyte per month. Data is not available immediately from this service. You have to transition it into S3 in order to read the data, and there's a little bit of delay in doing that, longer retrieval times. So again, we're going to cover that in more detail in the S3 focus webinar next week. And then lastly, we've got something called the AWS Storage Gateway. This is a mechanism for integrating on-premises storage that you might have together with the AWS cloud. So you have a VM that you install in your data center. This VM looks like an iSCSI target, so you're writing into a block device, but that block device is backed by some local cache and ultimately by S3 and Glacier. So it gives you huge scalability together with good local performance. It's great for using as a backup target with something like Commvault or Symantec Net Backup, and using that as a mechanism for off-siting your backups in a really elastic and low-cost manner. That's storage. Let's move on quickly and talk about a few application services. We've actually got a lot more than is on this slide. So there's an area where we've got quite a broad portfolio. So it's worth looking at the application services using a link that I'm going to show you later in the deck. Which is quickly, we've got Amazon CloudFront, which is a global content distribution network. It allows you to ensure consistent and high content delivery performance to users around the world. So it's got 40 plus cache nodes around the world. It works seamlessly with S3 or EC2 origin servers. So when a user requests a piece of content, it'll be delivered from the cache and then retained in the cache, and the next time a user requests that, they'll be delivered the cache copy with really good performance characteristics. So if you've got data that's hosted in a region in, say, Europe, and you want to serve that globally, you can deliver your data locally from Australia or the US or wherever your customers happen to be. So a really cool service. Cloud Search is an elastic search engine based on the Amazon A9 search engine. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but there's a very sophisticated feature set there. It automatically scales based on request and data volumes, and in-memory operation means that it can provide consistently low latency for search results. And then lastly, an elastic transcoder. So this is for transcoding video assets into multiple resolutions, multiple bit rates, and different output types. And again, there's a lot more detail on that on the AWS website, and I'll give you some details for that in a few minutes. Also, we announced another new service recently, which is called AppStream. This is a mechanism for streaming resource-intensive applications and games from the cloud. So you deploy your application onto AWS infrastructure where it's rendered using an instance type which is backed by a GPU, a specialized graphics processing unit. But you can stream that application to low-cost devices like a tablet, a mobile phone, or even a PC. And because the heavy lifting of compute and storage is handled on the high-performance EC2 instance, you can get really good performance for the applications on very, very low-powered hardware. So customers are coming out with some really innovative use cases for this, and we'll have more on that service to announce very soon. Right, let's move on to some data management and database services. We've got quite a lot of stuff to go through here. So we've got RDS, which is a managed relational database service. You can create MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, or Postgres SQL database instances. They're protected with backups and point-in-time recovery. You can specify I/O throughput. You can also use our multi-availability zone features for high availability of your data in this environment. Secondly, we've got DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database with extremely fast and low latency performance, accessible via an API, as you might guess. And you can dial up and down provisioned read and write capacity here, and you're charged for this on the basis of the amount of provisioned read-write capacity that your database has. And then lastly, on this slide, we've got something called ElastiCache, which is a solution for high scalability workloads where you need to do database caching with either Memcached or Redis. Again, elastic, and it's an extremely fast in-memory solution. More data services that we have. EMR I've already touched upon, which is our hosted and managed Hadoop service. Allows you to integrate with S3 or DynamoDB to access data, load it into the EMR cluster and run Hadoop jobs on that. We also have many other components of the Hadoop ecosystem that are available as part of EMR. So Hive, HBase, Pig, Impala, and others are also available on this platform. And as I've said already, it integrates with the Spot instance type for improved economics. We have a data pipeline service that allows you to design and operate data-driven workflows. And we have Redshift, which is a managed data warehouse using Postgres with ODBC or JDBC connectivity. You can use traditional existing query tools to query your data stored in Redshift. It's extremely low cost, so it's typically costing a tenth or less than the cost of a traditional data warehousing solution. And like all AWS services, you're only paying for what you use once you've established the warehouse. One new service in the data area that we announced quite recently is Kinesis. This is a fully managed stream processing service for handling large data ingest and processing in real time. So applications here are things like clickstream analysis, billing or metering. There's a lot of applications for this in the Internet of Things, the IoT area. Once again, it's quite new, but we're seeing significant adoption of this service, and it's really good for getting real-time insights and also allowing you to channel data from a data stream into the right place. So putting certain events from your data stream into different types of repository, like an EMR repository or a Redshift repository, is another common use case for this service. Right, let's move on now and talk about deployment and administration tools. The cool thing about the services on this slide is these are really, really high-value services. Customers that are using these deployment and administration tools get a massive amount of value out of them, and we get really, really positive feedback about these services. So CloudWatch allows you to monitor the resources that you're using, and obviously you can see that in graphical form, where you can use those CloudWatch alarms to trigger things like auto-scaling groups, which already touched upon. So that's a way for tracking usage and monitoring resources. IAM is a really powerful mechanism for managing and delegating permissions for the resources that you have within AWS. So you can use this, for example, to provide fine-grained control over an S3 bucket, or to restrict who can launch instances in your account. There's a huge amount of capability there. OpsWorks is a mechanism for deploying application stacks in a repeatable manner using Chef. CloudFormation allows you to define templates for provisioning resources, and that's a really good tool. It uses JSON-based definitions for the template, so it allows you to version control and release manage your infrastructure definition, and it's a mechanism for allowing you to build large numbers of repeated stacks that are identical, or building the same stack in multiple regions can be achieved with that tool in a really, really easy manner. And then lastly, Beanstalk is a platform as a service solution that allows you to deploy code and enables AWS to take care of resource deployment for you. So a super simple way for web developers to get started on the platform. We've also got another new service in this area as well, which is Cloud Trail. This service is, again, quite new. It was announced at reInvent last year. It allows you to see an audit trail of all API calls to your AWS services. So using that, you can gather intelligence for security analysis, resource change tracking, or compliance auditing. Very, very powerful tool. Our ecosystem, including actually Cloud Trail I've just talked upon, allows you to use existing management tools to manage the infrastructure. So you're not restricted necessarily to using the AWS Management Console or the APIs. There are many third parties that have integration points that allow you to manage the infrastructure via this sort of single pane of glass view. And we also support a wide range of technologies running on top of the platform. You can see a sample there, and there are many, many more as well. So we have compatibility with virtually all of the common software tools that are used today. Right, let's look now at architecture for a web application on the platform. So how do you use the services to achieve high availability and scalability for a web application? This just shows how you might combine the different services that AWS have in order to achieve that. You can see that users are getting their domain name resolution from Route 53 here, and that there are two sources of the application content. One is CloudFront, which has been used together with an S3 bucket for static content. So this would be JavaScript, HTML, images, static text or other assets that are required for the application. They're being served locally with acceleration from CloudFront. And then there's another set of services that are behind the Elastic Load Balancer, EC2 instances distributed across two availability zones. And behind that, the RDS service, the master and slave RDS service, once again distributed across two availability zones. The EC2 instances themselves are built into auto-scaling groups, so as traffic increases on the application, more instances will be spawned. So that should give you a flavor for how to build and architect web applications on AWS. It's also possible to integrate AWS with existing on-premises IT. There's a few different mechanisms that you can use to achieve that. The first is Active Directory Federation. So you can federate credentials and roles and groups from your Active Directory and use that to control roles, groups, and users on the AWS cloud. You can also extend the network configuration that you have into private networks on AWS using the VPC construct. We have a mechanism that allows customers to store their own encryption keys in the AWS environment using something called a hardware security module, a HSM appliance. So that's a mechanism for customers that have particular compliance or security requirements to add an extra layer of protection to their data. And then lastly, we have backup appliances that can be used, for example, the storage gateway or other third-party backup appliances that you might use to back up data from your on-premises IT into the AWS cloud. And of course, you can connect all that together using Direct Connect if you've got particularly stringent performance or security requirements. So lots of options for integrating AWS with on-premises IT. Right, let's move on now to next steps and how you can take advantage of all these services that we've talked about. So what we typically see is that customers start by trying the services in the free tier. And you can see at the bottom of this slide there's a link there to our Getting Started page. If you visit that link, you can find a whole lot more information on all the services that I've talked about during the webinar today, as well as actually quite a few services that we haven't had time to cover today, and you can see a few of those on this slide. So we have many more services in the application area than we've talked about today. Notification services that enable you to, for example, push notifications to mobile devices, a queuing service for building scalable queues for sharing Hi, I'm sorry about that. The line just dropped there for a moment. My apologies. So what I was saying was the SQS service allows you to build loosely coupled systems by handling messaging between different components in your architecture. So if you have a look at the Getting Started guide, you can find a lot more detail about those applications as well as all of the other infrastructure services that we covered during the webinar today. One of the resources that's extremely popular with customers is this, which is the AWS Architecture Center. So if you go here, you'll find a lot of detail on how to build certain application types using best practices for high availability and scalability. There's some great resources here, everything from more detail on how to build web applications, which is already touched upon at a high level here, all the way to things like large-scale processing of huge data sets or batch processing applications running on AWS. So if you're a systems or infrastructure architect or application architect, this is a really great resource for you to look at to find out more about how to migrate or build or integrate applications with the AWS cloud. So I really would encourage you to take a look at that. And then we also have a partner ecosystem. So there are a wide variety of AWS partners around the world that are able to help organizations with adoption and getting the most out of the AWS services. And you can see some partners listed on this slide. There's actually quite a wide range of partners, all the way from massive global systems integrators like Accenture, Capgemini, and Deloitte, all the way down to smaller partners that are operating in specific geographies. So do take a look at the partners, and it's possible that your organization may already have relationships with some of these partners, and you can obviously use those for support and assistance and development of strategies and plans to adopt the AWS cloud. A really good way to get support with the services. One other way that you can learn more about the AWS cloud is through our training and certification program. So we have a variety of different resources here which you can visit. So we have self-paced labs which allow you to practice working with specific AWS technologies in a guided way. So labs that are focused on particular services or on particular use cases are available. We have a training program which is actually cut into three categories. So architecture, development, and operations are the three different areas that we focus on. And we've recently launched, and actually continuing to launch, new certification options that allow you to validate the skills that you've developed in using the AWS cloud in either architecting, developing, or operating services using AWS. So please take a look at those if you're interested in learning more. Obviously, certification is a great way to demonstrate and validate the skills that you've got. So that pretty much concludes the content from today's webinar. I just want to point you to a couple of social media resources before we close the event today. If you're interested in keeping abreast of global AWS news and announcements, product updates, and product launches, please follow us at AWS Cloud on Twitter. And if you're interested in additional English language events here in Europe, then you can follow us at AWS_UKI, where we're actually retweeting some of the content from AWS Cloud, but also broadcasting our events program and webinar program here in Europe. So that concludes today's webinar. I'll just close again by thanking you for joining us again. And if you have questions, I'll leave the line open for a couple of minutes. You can enter these, and a member of our team will get back and follow up with you. Thanks again for joining us today.